And now I'd like to welcome to the stage Øvretveit, the Director of Arctic Frontiers.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Distinguished guests, dear friends, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to introduce the last two sessions that will focus on information needed to respond to Arctic change and to discussing the next steps. I will give some reflections on where we stand on these issues in the light of the panels on this conference and what we are working on back home in Norway. But before that, I would like to salute the organizers of this conference, Brendan and Andrea. This is a really great conference with excellent panels and an overall composition, so kudos to you. I need to change the picture of the presentation. All right. Thank you. So, scientific knowledge has influenced the development and functioning of societies for centuries. However, the general role of science in political decision-making and informed decision-making is increasingly being questioned, especially in today's post-factual reality. A reality of a global interconnected civilization where many different voices call for a universal truth without an ultimate need to scientifically support certain assumptions. In a more polarized world, balanced, answered, and scientific facts are increasingly being replaced by simple images and one-liners, a tendency that can be observed on both sides of the political spectrum and often amplified by social media. It was said yesterday that scientists in general are good at communicating, that they are good communicators. And this is my experience too, as leader of Arctic Frontiers. But journalists and the media that convey the messages of scientists to the public are often hunting simple, sensational messages, and not the complex messages various scientific projects and working groups are trying to give to the world. Journalists tell stories, and the good stories that connect with the reader requires a conflict or some sort of opposing, contrasting, polemic views on the issue. And this is a challenge, especially as has been discussed here. We need to build trust and understanding across different groups and interests operating in the Arctic. And this sort of more simplified media situation isn't always doing us a favor. Now, concerning climate and climate change, it is my impression that policymakers understand perfectly well what's going on and what needs to be done. We discuss this everywhere. We discuss it every year at Arctic Frontiers and everywhere else I go. And everybody pretty much agrees. So why have we not any truly effective actions in place, actions that will actually make a difference? We have all of these reports being made by institutions and working groups like AMAP and other Arctic Council working groups. And they have traditionally focused on assessment type of reports and summaries for policymakers, made for scientists and for experts in bureaucracy, and have not managed to communicate, at least in a sufficiently good way, to communicate the message to ordinary people, to voters. So how can we simplify the messages that these scientific working groups are communicating, so that also the public truly understands the urgency in the situation, and that actions are needed and that they are needed fast. Making the public understand that this is as important as covering more short-sighted local and national needs are very important, and communicating that the changes in life quality and material wealth do not have to be enormous to make the difference that is needed. And this poses also a challenge to scientists in finding better ways of communicating complex messages in a way that the broader public will get a clearer picture and a better understanding of more holistic solutions. And effects on actions must be included and communicated, so when policies are made, the policies will be sustainable, and also sustainable across different electoral periods. So what are the next steps? Working towards 2050, more problem-oriented projects should be prioritized. Co-creation and co-production should be prioritized. Cross-sector working is very important. Making business part of the solutions, not a problem. Lifting the role of humanities and social science, as was discussed here in the previous session. Circumpolar collaboration between science, business, people to people, and the government level is very important. And has been discussed in several panels here. We need more dialogue, and we need to build trust across borders, across sectors, including business, across political levels, cross generations, and importantly, cross expert policymakers on the one side and civil society, people and communities on the other side. So, how do we do this? Well, for once we can support and keep building the institutional framework in the Arctic, like the Arctic Council, working on scenario panels like was done here yesterday. It was very interesting to watch. Investing in collaboratory processes. The Norwegian Nansen project, I believe, was discussed here on Wednesday. I think it's a very good example. And finally, conferences. Like this one, that brings us out of our boxes and silos and forces us to listen to other opinions and arguments and see other perspectives. And at least as one path to continue the conversations that we have had here on this conference, I would like to invite you to Tromsø in January to Arctic Frontiers. We have been working with knowledge-based sustainable development of the Arctic since 2007. Some 3,000 delegates from 35 countries meet at Arctic Frontiers every year. Ministers, scientists, business leaders, NGOs, indigenous people, local leaders, and finally, and most importantly, I would say, young people, students on different levels, from kindergarten to postdoc level. These will be the leaders, as was also discussed here in the previous sessions, in 2050. So helping them finding the right knowledge and the path to the future is very important. So Arctic Frontiers is coming up. Arctic Frontiers 2020, the 14th conference, echoing the topics and discussions on this conference. The title will be Power of Knowledge. Discussing the role of science and knowledge in local and societal development, in understanding the Arctic oceans, in business development, in social development, obstacles to science policy processes, to mention a few topics. We have a call for papers coming up, so a few words about our science conference. The 4 themes, if any of you have a paper that you would like to submit, the 4 themes will be Arctic food security, disruptive technologies, global and local, the global or local in a more climate impact on community context, and finally knowledge-based development in the Arctic. And these 2 last one that I mentioned are very similar to what has been discussed here these days. I would also like to mention that together with the Science Diplomacy Center at Tufts University, we are working on a book series on Springer Publisher called Informed Decision Making for Sustainability. And Volume 2, Building Common Interest in the Arctic Ocean with Global Inclusion, is coming up now, and abstract submission to the science part of Arctic Frontiers is done in parallel with the chapter submission to the book, the book that we have in process now. And the deadline for abstract submissions and chapter submissions is September the 23rd. So you're all welcome to develop these issues with us further in Tromsø, the 26th to the 30th of January. On that note, I would like to thank you very much for your attention.